Have you ever wondered if a single day could change the future of the entire world? Imagine thousands of soldiers standing on a battlefield, knowing that the next few hours could decide the fate of nations. On June 18th, 1815, near a small town called Waterloo, in present-day Belgium, one of the most important battles in history was about to begin. But before we reach that dramatic moment, we need to understand the extraordinary man who stood at the center of it all. That man was Napoleon Bonaparte. Long before he became famous, Napoleon was just a young boy, born on the Mediterranean island of Corsica in 1769. His family was not wealthy or powerful, and few people could have imagined that this ordinary child would one day rise to become one of the most feared and influential leaders in world history. Yet from an early age, Napoleon showed remarkable intelligence, ambition, and determination. As a young man, Napoleon joined the French army and quickly demonstrated an exceptional talent for military leadership. At the same time, France was experiencing a period of turmoil known as the French Revolution. The country was filled with political conflict, uncertainty, and violence. While many people struggled to survive during these chaotic years, Napoleon saw an opportunity to prove himself and rise through the ranks. With every successful military campaign, Napoleon's reputation grew stronger. He became known as a brilliant strategist, capable of defeating larger and stronger armies. The French people admired him, and his influence continued to expand. Eventually, he gained enough power to become the ruler of France. But Napoleon's ambitions extended far beyond leading a single nation. He dreamed of creating an empire unlike anything Europe had seen before. Over the following years, Napoleon's armies marched across Europe, winning battle after battle. Countries fell under French control, and rulers across the continent began to fear his growing power. His victories were so impressive that many people believed he was unstoppable. At the height of his success, Napoleon controlled or influenced much of Europe, and it seemed as though no force on earth could stand in his way. However, every powerful empire eventually faces challenges. As Napoleon continued expanding his influence, resistance began to grow. Several European nations realized that, if they did not unite against him, they could be defeated one by one. Powerful alliances started to form, bringing together countries that shared a common goal. Stopping Napoleon before his empire became even larger and more dangerous. One of Napoleon's most critical decisions came in 1812 when he launched an invasion of Russia. Confident after years of success, he expected another quick victory. Instead, he encountered disaster. The Russians retreated deeper into their territory, supplies became scarce, and the brutal winter arrived. Thousands of French soldiers died from hunger, disease, and freezing temperatures, turning the campaign into a catastrophe.
The disastrous Russian campaign weakened Napoleon more than any enemy ever had. Seeing an opportunity, European nations joined forces and launched new attacks against France. One by one, Napoleon's victories disappeared, and eventually, he was defeated in 1814. Forced to give up his throne, he was sent into exile on the small island of Elba. Most people believed his story had finally come to an end, but they were about to discover that Napoleon was not finished yet, and his return would lead directly to the battle that changed world history forever.
When Napoleon was sent into exile on the island of Elba, most of Europe believed his remarkable story was over. After years of war, leaders across the continent finally felt relieved. The man who had dominated Europe and defeated countless armies was now confined to a small island in the Mediterranean Sea. To many people, it seemed impossible that he could ever return to power. Yet Napoleon had other ideas, and he was already thinking about his next move. While living on Elba, Napoleon closely followed events in France. He learned that many citizens were unhappy with the new government that had replaced him. Some people missed the stability and national pride they felt under his leadership, while others worried about the country's future. As these frustrations grew, Napoleon became convinced that he still had supporters willing to help him reclaim power and change the course of history once again. In February 1815, Napoleon made a decision that shocked the world. Accompanied by a small group of loyal followers, he escaped from Elba and sailed toward France. It was an incredibly risky mission. If he were captured, he could face imprisonment or even death. But Napoleon understood that opportunities like this rarely came twice. With determination and confidence, he set out to reclaim everything he had lost. As Napoleon marched through the French countryside, something extraordinary happened. Soldiers who had been ordered to stop him refused to fight. Instead, many joined his cause. His reputation as a military genius still inspired loyalty among thousands of men. With every village he passed and every mile he traveled, more supporters gathered around him. What began as a small group quickly transformed into a growing army moving toward Paris. Soon, Napoleon entered Paris in a stunning return to power. The French king fled, and once again, Napoleon became the ruler of France. News of his comeback spread rapidly across Europe, leaving kings, emperors, and political leaders in disbelief. The man they thought had been defeated forever was now back on the throne. Suddenly, the peace that Europe had worked so hard to achieve was under serious threat. Determined not to repeat past mistakes, Europe's major powers quickly formed a new alliance. Britain, Prussia, Austria, Russia, and several other nations agreed that Napoleon had to be stopped permanently. Among the most important commanders preparing for war were the Duke of Wellington of Britain and the Prussian leader Gebhard von Blücher. Together, they would play a crucial role in the dramatic events that were about to unfold. Napoleon knew he was running out of time. If all of his enemies combined their forces, France would be heavily outnumbered. To avoid this, he decided to strike first. His strategy was simple but bold: defeat the Allied armies before they could fully unite. In June 1815, Napoleon led his troops into present-day Belgium. Both sides moved quickly, knowing that a decisive confrontation was drawing closer with every passing day. Then came the morning of June 18, 1815. Heavy rain had turned the fields around Waterloo into thick mud, making movement difficult for soldiers, horses, and artillery. Across the battlefield, thousands of men waited anxiously for the coming fight. Cannons stood ready, flags waved in the wind, and commanders prepared their armies. The fate of Europe now hung in the balance. As the morning passed, Napoleon finally gave the order to attack, and the Battle of Waterloo began. As the Battle of Waterloo began, the peaceful countryside was transformed into a scene of chaos and destruction. Cannons thundered across the battlefield, shaking the ground beneath the soldiers' feet. Thick clouds of smoke drifted through the air, while thousands of men marched forward under constant enemy fire. The battle that would decide the future of Europe had finally begun, and neither side was willing to back down. Napoleon launched a series of powerful attacks against the Allied army led by the Duke of Wellington. Wave after wave of French soldiers advanced across the muddy fields, hoping to break through the enemy lines. The fighting was intense and relentless. Every position was fiercely contested, and both sides suffered heavy losses. Despite the pressure, Wellington's troops continued to hold their ground against the French assaults. Hour after hour, the battle continued without a clear winner. Smoke covered much of the battlefield, making it difficult to see what was happening. Soldiers fought with courage and determination, as the outcome remained uncertain. At several moments during the day, it seemed possible that Napoleon might achieve another famous victory. Yet hidden beyond the battlefield, a development was taking place that would soon change everything. Earlier in the day, Napoleon had received reports that Prussian forces under General Blücher were moving toward Waterloo. At first, there was hope that they could be delayed. However, as the afternoon progressed, the reports proved accurate. More and more Prussian soldiers began arriving on the battlefield. Their appearance created a serious problem for Napoleon, who now faced the challenge of fighting two armies instead of one. The arrival of the Prussians increased pressure on the French forces from every direction. Even so, Napoleon refused to accept defeat. He believed there was still one final opportunity to turn the battle in his favor. Determined to secure victory, he prepared to deploy the most respected and feared soldiers in his entire army. These elite troops were known as the Imperial Guard, and their reputation was legendary throughout Europe. The Imperial Guard marched forward in what would become one of the most famous moments in military history. These veteran soldiers had fought in many of Napoleon's greatest victories and were considered among the finest troops in Europe. As they advanced through smoke and gunfire, the future of the battle seemed to rest on their shoulders. Napoleon hoped this powerful attack would finally break the Allied defenses. But the attack failed. Wellington's soldiers stood firm and unleashed devastating fire against the advancing French troops. For the first time, the seemingly unstoppable Imperial Guard was forced to retreat. The sight shocked the French army. As soldiers watched their most trusted warriors fall back, confidence quickly turned into panic. Discipline began to collapse, and what had once looked like a possible victory became a disastrous defeat. As evening approached, the Battle of Waterloo came to an end. Napoleon's army retreated, and his dream of rebuilding his empire was shattered forever. Days later, he was forced to give up power and was sent into exile on the remote island of St. Helena, where he would spend the rest of his life. Waterloo changed the course of history, reshaped Europe, and influenced world events for generations. More than 2 centuries later, it remains one of the most important battles ever fought, proving that a single day can truly change the world forever.